Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Property AI Report. We are here once more to tell you all about this week's events in the paired worlds of property and AI. I'm here with my co-host, Matt Goddard. Hey, Matt, how are you?
I'm really good. Cheers, man. Looking forward to this one.
Likewise, yes, it's going to be really good. So we are going to dive deep into what has been going on in property, first of all, and then we're going to segue seamlessly into the worlds of tech and AI. We've also got a tool of the week coming up, and indeed our occasional weird AI of the week right towards the end. Stay tuned for that. We're going to start as ever, though, with our property news. All right, first story this week is all about the stats that came out from the inimitable 20CI. Katie Billany and co have been out on the PR trail talking about various insights that they have established and have come to light in our industry and property. The first of them that I wanted to talk about was actually the interesting drop in the share of online and hybrid agents in overall transaction levels. So it's gone down from 5.2 to 5%. And Matt, I think we were quite interested in the sort of share of the self-employed models within that as well.
That's correct, yes, Matt. I know you pointed out that the rise in that had also been cited. I think it was up to 2.1%, was it? Although, again, you'd also highlighted we're not sure where that had risen from. And so was it 2% up to 2.1, 2.5% up to 2.1? I'm sure Katie will be able to provide us with some insights to that ahead of next week. But I think it's also always because of the nature of our industry, maybe we focus in on those elements, and having seen that decline of the purple bricks and the online agents, it's keeping an eye on where those hybrid agencies are going. And I certainly know from the agencies I speak to, a lot of them are considering self-employed models alongside their traditional approach. And we saw similar with when Purple Bricks first came on the scene, where people are thinking of doing online agency alongside their traditional agencies, which you could argue was just a website for some of them, but it's that sort of how can we supplement our approach. But I think maybe sometimes that 5% or the 2.1% seems higher, maybe because of the prevalence and presence on the likes of social media and other areas that some of the well-known hybrid agents are. It'd be interesting to see where that 2.1% keeps going.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I remember, and again, showing my age here, going back to like early prime days back in the early 2000s, and there was always this kind of 5% sort of rump of like for sale by owner guys and girls who just, and so there was almost like this kind of like 95% of the market would use kind of traditional agents or agencies and stuff like that. Then there'd be the 5% who just do some funky stuff. It used to be for sale by owner, and then it became like, I'm going to do it by online, and they grew to about just over 5%. And now self-employed agents is coming in and growing. And I just wonder, a lot of agents I speak to who aren't part of the self-employed movement say that actually it's going to top out at 5%. Essentially, all they're eating is the kind of onliners lunch. And then once it gets to about 5%, then still actually 95% of sellers just aren't going to use them anyway. So no, have you got any sort of insights into that? Is that what you're finding when you get out there as
I
well?
disagree with that approach or thought in a way. I know there's always, if you're looking to be down on it, there's always examples. There's one I was speaking to a few weeks ago where they had a self-employed agent in Southwest Wales who also was part of the RNLI. And so it was a case of they'd be out saving lives on the boats and then occasionally come back and maybe try to sell your house as well. So it wasn't a full-time job, and they were approaching the sort of self-employed model almost as sometimes Uber drivers, where I'll chat to an Uber driver and say, how's your day? When did you start a shift? He said, I've just finished work. I'm turning on now and doing a few hours of this. And it's almost that gig economy approach to agency. And so you can always cite that in your local town and have that as a negative. But I think there's at the other side of things, there are some really strong agents coming out of well-established corporates, like going back to the Foxtons days. Like a lot of the people who I know who are very good agents at Foxtons have wanted to move back to maybe their hometowns or certainly out of central London and have ended up in different places, but now working as agents. In fact, one of my friends, Guy, has moved up to Chester, where he's originally from with his family, relocated. He was running Sotheby's, managing director for Sotheby's, based out of the London office there. And he's now gone up as part of Harding Green. So there's these sort of self-employed models where there's very good technical stacks, very good support networks, but you are a self-employed agent. And I can see people not just going for the whole, I want to pick up the kids from school, I want to drop them off, I want to be able to go get a nice coffee and a croissant at 11 o'clock and tell everyone about it. But we were actually taking the business very seriously. Another example to think of is the London broker run by Rupert Collingwood, who have taken that very serious approach in that prime London area and maybe don't want to be part of one of the sort of prime located prime London agencies, but still have the same level of diligence and commitment that they did when they were there, if not more, because it's their own baby.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's other interesting ones, as you mentioned, these kind of prime London ones. Movelli, which is run by the Littlewood brothers, Ben and Chris. That again has been growing really quite significantly. I think they've got 40 plus self-employed agents now, and they seem to be targeting essentially ex-Savills, Knight Frank, kind of Hamptons operators, and being very successful at that. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that this kind of notional 5% limit really necessarily applies to this instance. I think whereas online was a bit of a different approach. So getting your property up onto Rightmove without, but by going a different way without going traditional. I think self-employed is much more of it bears more similarities with traditional agency in terms of that personal relationship and the kind of the way that you sell than it does with specifically the kind of onliners. So yes, whilst it is bucketed together in the 20CI category of self-employed and onliners, I see it's quite fundamentally different, I think. And I do think that there's still some way for it to go.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are quite drawn towards it, both from the supply side, so agents wanting to cast out on their own, as well as from the demand side. I think buyers are quite taken by the idea that there's somebody on call who's devoted to them and to their areas. And yeah, I think that as you can see from the likes of EXP and the growth, they've got 700 plus, I think, over the last week. They went over that landmark. There's lots of still pumping into these areas. And I think as people become more confident that it's actually a viable and something to consider, and the kind of the incentives for people to recruit within EXP, I think, is very well known that if you recruit somebody and then they go on to be massively successful, then you take a cut of their staff. And then if they recruit people, then you get a cut of theirs. So I think there's incentives all the way down for it to continue to keep coming.
No, exactly that.
Brilliant. So also in the 2020 CI stats, we found out that what's almost been a kind of anecdotal, and pick a side, you can believe the National Residential Landlords Association, that landlords are selling up, or you could believe that they aren't selling up because it's not necessarily coming through in the stats. Actually, according to 20CI, it is coming through in the stats now. There are a lot of landlords selling up. It is becoming too difficult, too complex, too regulated, too unprofitable for as many specifically private landlords to remain in the market, and they're selling up and going elsewhere. What do you think is going to be the impact of that kind of in the broader market?
I think for me, what I've seen certainly from agencies and with a lot of the agency work with the relocation agent network, they're trying to retain those landlords, because whilst there are landlords selling up, there are also landlords who are looking to grow, where maybe they've got that infrastructure in place and the approach in place to deal with the compliance demands, or maybe they appreciate they need to be paying for management and factor that into part of their sort of finances when it comes to being a landlord model. I think there's still that, not necessarily the eye of storm, but a lot of people are keeping a very close eye on what's actually going to come out of the Renters' Rights Bill when it's enacted. Because whilst we know it's coming, there's a lot of nerves and focus on losing those Section 21s, going down that Section 8. And I, anecdotally, and both of us prefer to do it on the data, which is why we're obviously doing what we do. But my friends who are landlords and multiple property landlords haven't sold up as yet. So I think that is part of maybe the knowledge and news washing through more on a countrywide level rather than industry-wide level. But seeing what we've done, obviously Katie and the team at 20EA, their data is always pretty strong, and I'm sure the other good data providers that are out there have probably got a similar pattern coming through in their records.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think it's quite significant in anticipation of the Renters Reform or Renters' Rights Act or whatever. I think that, yes, that the message is obviously getting through, perhaps those smaller, or to 18,000 of them, according to the stats, that this is going to be trouble and probably more hassle than it's worth. So why don't you get out now? And perhaps they're the accidental landlords who just hung in when they sold their kids, or sorry, when their kid moved out of a student flat and they've just held on to it, or the couple that got together and one of them had a flat and they've just decided to let it out. Perhaps it's those guys who are actually deciding to end it. Yes, I think more and more it seems like it's becoming corporatized, and almost deliberately so. There's the build to rent category that's increasing too. It seems that it is easier for governments and other significant organizations to deal with larger landlord entities, whether they are professionalized landlords, companies, or the build to rent or corporates. And that does seem to be hollowing out some of the more casual, if that's
Mm.
an appropriate and kind enough phrase for landlords who are very professional and do a really good job. Perhaps it wasn't the calling. It was just more of that they found themselves in it and it seemed to be working out.
And I think for most people as well, it'll be absolutely fine after the event. We will get stories and we'll have things that are utilized as part of promotion to say you should be using our fully managed service because this just happened down the road, down the borough, down the M4 or whatever it might be. One of the ones we were talking about earlier this week when I met up with a few lettings businesses was the fact that if you serve notice to get the tenant out based on the fact you're going to sell the property and then they can't sell the property at the rate you're going, then you've got a year before you can rent the property again. And so it's a case of that's going to be a void periods because of the fact they've not got it. And so you start to hear things like that, and it hits the press, and people, Martin Lewis or the equivalent, has it. Then, but that we only know that once it's kicked in. And I think it's always seeing the trends in the data is definitely something to follow.
Yeah, interesting. And just as a final piece on that, what again I'm starting to hear from agents is that they're using the kind of fixed term contract. So actually saying, look, if you're going to sign up as a tenant for with us, then you're signing up for a 12-month contract. And if you wish to leave before the end of that, then you are responsible for, if we can't find another tenant, then you are responsible for that additional period. And I wonder if that's giving landlords a bit more kind of comfort for kind of just like knowing that it's going to be that they're not necessarily going to be at the whim of somebody trying to get out of it, at least before this act comes into play.
And that's if the, as part of enacting the act doesn't mean that every single fixed term contract suddenly rolls onto the new legislation, which is
Yeah,
by the things what's going to happen.
yeah, 100%. And that's what I mean. Yeah. So for now, it's just holding people together and holding the line until such time as we actually see exactly what the law is going to involve, which again may take another couple of years before it comes into effect. Yes. So interesting times, and yeah, interesting to see how that those numbers track from 20 CI and 20A as we go through. Okay, next up on our property news, we do like a good portal ad campaign. Do we?
Mhm.
And this certainly is a portal ad campaign. Now it's from Rightmove and it's basically being touted as a love-in with agents. So following the fees situation early this year, which comes hot on the heels of the one from last year and the year before, and perhaps the 20 years before that, Rightmove is now championing estate agents and making them feel all warm and fuzzy inside as to their importance in the home moving process. Now, this sounds very familiar because I think Zoopla did a very similar thing not just over Christmas. I think where they were actually featuring individual estate agents and so on. Yeah, what's your sort of take on moves? Yeah, big cuddle for estate agents and how important they are.
I was just really pleased, to be honest, that they'd listened to our podcast, taken note, and made such an immediate reaction to it, to be honest, Mal. It was
Hey,
only last week that we were calling them out, and I think you cited Sean Adams, and suddenly here we are, and they've got these ad campaigns. I know ChatGPT's models are pretty sharp to create content, but they've obviously all gone all in after our side of things. But it's
power, that's it right there.
yeah, it's interesting to see how they manage to do these things and still keep the profit margin, and it's not affecting that side of it. But it does feel like sometimes that these are after the horse has bolted, hasn't it? Where they try to do the bit of PR marketing.
It really does. And I think that there's still, and if you haven't listened to Johan Svanström's interview on the Today program from I think it was March, we'll find it out and we'll put it in the show notes. But yeah, it's basically where he's asked directly, what about these fees and the fact that you're squeezing estate agents? And literally there's about 3 minutes of dead air where he's just literally umming and ahhing and going, doesn't really want to answer the question. It's honestly, it's like cringe. So yes, so do find that. We'll try and share it. But yes, but perhaps because he was put in that position, he felt very strongly that he didn't want to have that in again. That they have now launched this campaign. It does feel, as you say, a bit stable door, but I don't know. It's really hard to find something positive to say about it. It's so obviously a sop going to the agents, decrease the fees, or even cut how much we're increasing them. But we are going to mention that actually, do you know what, guys? You're a bit important. Thanks for all your help. Yeah, Jesus, whilst you are crucifying us, and if that's an appropriate metaphor for Easter. And yeah, you are literally just rinsing us for on the financial side and not letting us be able to make decisions about what we want to do with our money. But at least you are patting us very gently on the head and saying, "Good children." So that's yet more portal excitement, courtesy of our good friends over at Rightmove, I think, gang. But yes, I think that once more is yes, not necessarily the best use of their funds. Perhaps they could just not charge as much. Don't know. Moving swiftly on, we want to talk also about property technology, or PropTech, as it has become known over time. So the government has noticed that PropTech exists, which is nice, seeing as both of us have some interest in this particular sector, both Matt and I. But yes, so the government has set up a partnership program following the recent launch of a very long titled The Opportunity for PropTech, Leveraging Technology for the UK's Built Environment, which was commissioned by none other than the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. So this sounds great. And many of these things do have very long titles. So it's very delighting to see that this has now fallen on PropTech and our sector, that we've got that particular report out. But what do you think is going to make any difference, Matt?
I don't, I don't think it'll make an immediate difference. Like anything involved with the government, I think it'll be a slow burn. But I also think it's for those who will get involved. I've been part of the Lettings Industry Council now for a number of years, and we have I don't know what the word is for when it's 3 times a year, but if we did it 4 times a year, it'd be quarterly. But anyway, 3 times a year,
I
we
don't know.
get
Anyway,
together, and Teresa Wallace, who chairs it, has in people from the government, both D-Look, which I'm not even going to try say what the whole D-Look stands for, but as part of that, we have government departments come in and government associated businesses like GeoPlace, who are very heavily involved in the digitization of things like the UPRN, so unique property reference number for those who don't know the acronym. And seeing those guys and having worked with those guys all those years ago when I was at Repit, it's a case of I know these are really good departments and they're like us, don't want to really be seen in the light of day, want to get on and actually create cool things and make a difference. But they're there slogging away and not necessarily getting to the right places. So as part of those initiatives, if you put your hand up and just find the right people, you do start to get a bit of momentum through that. And I've seen some really good examples of that through people like Accessible PRS, where they've attended the Lettings Industry Council, spoke to the right people, and now the right portals have got the right information in for Accessible PRS. The CRMs have added the right details as well, and it's starting to see that change, not in a noisy way, but actually a progress. And I think this might well be the same, where it might be it's in City AM, it's in our property information, and then we don't hear for anything for a year, and there's 2 or 3 meetings, but actually in the background, cogs are whirring. I say all of that, but every time someone from the government turns up, it's a different set of people. But at least, as you say, there's been a stamp put on that. And if we can start looking at better digitization of the government's data, then, all for it.
Yeah, and because the big unlock is around speed of transaction that I imagine everybody listening who's involved in the UK property market is just absolutely crying out for, is how the hell do we make sure that these transactions take a lot quicker? Because it is in everybody's interest, whether you're an agent, whether you're a seller buyer, that this arcane, ridiculous process is actually sped up, and data has to form a really important part of that, and open access to data rather than being constrained in some dusty filing cabinet somewhere in Whitehall. That information being freely available and flowing through the process, I think has got to help everybody, right?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. All right, so that is our property news this week. Let's get stuck into some AI and tech news. All right, so we want to start this week with Microsoft's Copilot. And this is coming via its Edge platform, so it's Edge browser. And you are able to essentially show it what you're doing, and then it's going to help you do it better. Is that right?
It's very much on the precipice of agentic, isn't it? It's, from some of the responses that have been involved in it, and being able to actually, similar to OpenAI's operator that came out a few months back, you're able to actually say to it, go off and book me a steak dinner in Warrington, and off it'll go and interact with the Edge browser and fill in the information and guide you through, rather than so everyone who uses AI is using the context window if they're not using the API and setting in prompts and such. Whereas this is very much a case of someone sat next to you, you are utilizing the same browser that you're using.
Yeah, and I think that kind of familiarity is going to be a real sort of boon. Certainly, I think to help people to understand what it can do, because once you see an AI, an agentic AI, kind of operating on your behalf and working through things, that's when it starts to be real. I think until that point, it's all very kind of theoretical, and maybe some pointy heads like us get excited by it. But it's only when it is actually starting to understand a bit about you, it knows that you're vegan or you're all in for Kentucky Fried Chicken. I don't know, maybe that. It just goes,
Point of plug. Is there a Nando's equivalent of a black card for Kentucky Fried Chicken and you wanted one of those?
pretty much it. We're angry. We're here for
Colonel
support.
Sanders, we're here if you want us to plug you.
Sponsorship, yeah, absolutely. Just get in touch. We're right here. But yes, I think that there is a huge amount of education that can come from this, particularly. So yeah, I don't know. The Microsoft Copilot side of things, that it's never really quite lived up to its kind of hype at the start, has it? Copilot versus some of the other platforms, but it's quite integrated with a lot of the stuff. I know I've got it on obviously my Windows platforms, my Office, on Word and things like that, and I can ask it for help. Although I haven't done that in a long while. Is that something that you've?
I get prompts. I know you're sat here on your Mac, and that's why you look a lot more glossy than I do on my Windows-based PC. But I've got on my keyboard here, I've got the Copilot keyboard, a key available to me. But initially, there's a lot of, I think it's that's the use cases that they were talking about versus what was actually available. And so I remember my cousin even saying, "Oh, yeah, I'll be able to take my Word document and ask it to produce a PowerPoint, and it'll get the images, I'll do all of this, and it'll create it immediately." And it's not managed to achieve that yet for me anyway. But what I have seen creeping in more is that copy paste has been replaced by Copilot. And so we had that. And I think you and I talked about very early AI, the sort of spell check that was a squiggly line and then it started suggesting something and all of a sudden it's suggesting the next sentence. The AI is creeping in without you necessarily realizing. And I did use it the other day to summarize my OneNote from a meeting and actually give me a couple of actions. And it's not as good, in my opinion, as and something like Fathom that is very much specific to that use case, but it's a good generalized tool that's readily available for a lot of people. And you could argue if you're in the IT department, it probably needs to be given what you have to pay per license to actually enable it within a business. But for individual use, it's there, it gets going. But I think that visualization and some of the use cases people talk about is probably a year ago now. Mustafa Suleiman, who's now running Microsoft's AI, isn't he? Who he put a video up on LinkedIn of what is clearly Copilot Vision now, talking him through as he browsed websites looking for clothes, and it actually took him to certain things and said, actually, this might not work for you, but let's go find this. This is the look that you're trying to achieve. And he's actually talking to him as if it was sat next to. And those visualizations are where you suddenly start to say, actually, yes, this is where we can see it going. But rather than maybe something gimmicky where it's talking, when you can see it interacting with a browser, you can suddenly think, actually, one of the companies I work with over in Dubai's got maybe 20 people in an admin team, and they're copy and pasting information between browsers and moving off and ordering searches on a site, on the DLD site. That could easily be something that Copilot Vision is suddenly taking information from one system, going off, logging into a government website, populating that information, and then pulling back the documents and storing them accordingly. That starts to make sense to the whole process, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And then, what you're doing is you're freeing your people up to do things that are much more inspiring than sitting there pressing copy paste way too much. But yeah, no, that sounds, again, more steps forward every single week. And I think this is the opportunity that this gives people to learn about what's possible, I think is going to be one of the big wins of it for sure. So, talking about how people are using AI and the potential for it, interesting report in the Harvard Business Review this week about how people are really using generative AI in 2025, and it's got a kind of top 10 things that people were using it for in 2024 and are now using it for in 2025. And really interestingly, some of the more kind of technical jobs that people have been using it for are starting to drift, and it's becoming a lot more sort of emotional. The top three for this year, we've got therapy/companionship, organizing my life, and finding purpose. All right, at the top three. And two of those, organizing my life and finding purpose, weren't in 2024's top 10. So it does seem those that are coming perhaps after the early adopters are finding a really distinctly different way of using it.
I think some of this has really become in part of that prevalence and awareness of them. I know we spoke last week with relation to ChatGPT and the sort of social media trend of making yourself into a doll and putting you in that doll pack. And I've seen a number of them since. And my sort of a lot younger than me cousin, who isn't in IT at all, was aware of AI creating those dolls when we went for Sunday lunch yesterday. So it's that awareness and that creation, I think, is then driving people, oh, I actually got this app. What else can I do? And it becomes that individual case, whereas maybe early on it was businesses who were looking at how they could utilize it. And in this case of obviously being techies, when I remember being at a conference 2 years ago and someone said, oh, have you heard of Copilot? And it was the geeks in the room put our hands up because we were thinking of GitHub Copilot. And then she talks about what Microsoft were going to be releasing. And so she'd used two different in that context. And actually, early on, it was very much, I'm a business, got technical background involved. We're going to adopt AI for this. And I think that's where we saw more of those broader business use cases on the list. And now it's people who have actually got it in their pocket on their phone as an app who are firing away those questions and then discovering actually I need to put together a meal plan based on my contents in my fridge, or actually I've got this difficult conversation I've got to have with somebody. Can you help me come up with some prompts? And I think because of how difficult it is for businesses to adopt AI, and because of the fact that as a business you really need to get all your data together and understand your processes before you go for these things, it means that suddenly the things that we are seeing greater degree of are your personal approaches and asking those, can you organize my life? Yeah, I know you've got a great map in your list of a little tour that you're planning. I was trying to work out if I could get to my dog to Lanzarote at Christmas via France and one of the airlines that flies to France. And so it's a case of see if you can organize this trip for me. What's the approach? Turns out the dog might have to lose a bit of weight if she's going to come in the cabin rather than the hold, and that's a requirement. But those individual pieces sit in there, don't they? And I think that's why we're seeing a shift in those top 10 use cases.
Yeah, really interesting. And you mentioned this, the kind of the AI imagery, and we were speaking about it last week. Apparently, this week's trend, aside from people in the kind of sticky packets, and then previous to that was Studio Ghibli, this week everybody is making their pets into humans.
Or humans into pets.
The other way around, exactly. You can make your mate
I
into.
make a great British bulldog.
Yeah, that's right. I want to
English
see that.
bulldog.
Let's make sure that's actually going to be the ident for this week's.
I retried Mabel 3 times because I was offended by Mabel's my dog, but I offended 3 times by what was coming back. But it was that, and it was horror film stars in kids' books was the other one that I saw.
That's right. Pinhead, like being sad because nobody wanted to play with him, things like that.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
yes, or Freddy's, I don't know,
We
treehouse.
have.
Of Friday the 13th. So yeah, so there's a lot of stuff. And what I love is it's just creativity, right? It's actually there's a lot been said about how this is going to kill creativity and with AI can just do everything. But actually human ingenuity of making these crossover kind of random stuff, I think it's just great fun. And as you say, it's getting more and more people involved in it, people who otherwise wouldn't necessarily be that interested in the more technical uses of AI. And it's just getting them into understanding all this sort of stuff it can do, which then brings them into actually, can you also help me with my relationship challenges? So yeah, I think it's really interesting, a really fascinating case of how technology draws people in at different times.
And even yesterday, I know I referred to my cousin just there about the packeted doll, but we were talking that we've been to a couple of family events recently where people have produced really fancy invitation flyers like you'd get to a wedding or to a christening. And the people who produced it have clearly done it in Canva or something else, spent a lot of time and a lot of love and attention to it. I'm saying
Yeah.
that in case they ever listen to this. And so over Easter Sunday lunch, it's like, why didn't we get one for this? And so I prompted it, put in some bits and pieces, and suddenly there's this beautiful invite that I sent out as a group. And they were like, when did you manage to get your laptop out and create that? It's like, no, I've done it while you guys have been talking, which makes me look really sad actually now. I've really
The Goddard family get-togethers are never going to see so much invitation, basically some inflation. Everybody's going to be striving to beat the last one that's been done. It's going to
yeah.
be awesome. You have to bring them on. You have to show us. Brilliant. Talking about niceties and politeness, it turns out that courtesy costs something. And in fact, in the case of ChatGPT, courtesy costs quite a lot because it's costing them millions simply for people saying please and thank you to ChatGPT. Now, this is one that you spotted, Matt. It's absolutely brilliant.
It's one that nearly crossed under the radar actually because it was just such a throwaway comment from Sam Altman about the cost of it. Some people say chivalry isn't dead, but maybe if we want to save the planet and the amount of money that OpenAI are having to pay and the amount of obviously power that these server farms are rinsing through, that please and thank you might have to be dropped. I certainly will struggle because my Echo gets a please and a thank you. She hasn't started, it's okay. A please and a thank you as part of the day, and she always comes back and says you're welcome. But I did see a good meme going around of the sort of the Terminator Judgment Day. It comes around and there's one robot spares a human because it's the one that kids always said please and thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, like your Roomba that's going around your house that you keep kicking and just all that sort of stuff. That's going to come back. All right. They are not going to forget. But also, just as a side, my kids, like who are teenagers, absolutely take the mick at me for saying please and thank you to the machines. But I keep telling them, you better add just in case.
Have you seen also this week, and I realize it's not on the agenda, but the robots with the water cannons on for putting out the fires that are being utilized? It's
Yeah.
not a short hop, skip, and a jump from not putting out fires to being crowd control, is it? Or even
Dude,
replace it with a rocket launcher.
100%. It's do not show the thing that is going to be like, yeah, absolutely. Of course, it's going to be nice and kind of bad fire.
Yeah, everything's great. Why have we descended into this? Positive stuff.
Exactly.
Back to property.
Strap on those rocket launchers. It's a very different mindset. But it's okay because we're going to get onto the fallibility of robots in a second. All right, that's coming. That's, in fact, let's bring it on now. So there was a race or a half marathon over in China where all the great robots are right now. And they did this race against humans where they had 21 different humanoid robots seeking to complete the half marathon. Now, good news for those who are mortally in fear of the robots and their abilities to perform human tasks is that only six of them actually made it to the end and they stumbled and fell over and all that sort of stuff. And the fastest time was 2 hours 40, which is quite considerably slower than the humans can do it. Do we think that's where they're going to stop?
I think we should jump in and say straight away that these robots actually did resemble humanoid robots as well. It's not like the Daleks in Doctor got to a set of stairs in the marathon and couldn't actually get it further along. It was proper humanoid robots and struggling. So, like with anything, if it's the engineering part that's letting them down rather than the AI.
Yes, engineers, get your act together.
Yeah, I have to be careful because my knees don't work anymore, so I'm not sure I'd be able to finish what they're finishing.
So in a couple of years, you can have robot knees. They'll be fine.
Perfect. Look forward to it.
And the rest of you will be just as you are. So yeah, so I think it's one of those things where right now we can go, do you know what? Look, how funny that is. But then literally next year, suddenly they're just going to absolutely smash us. And I remember when the kind of the Go and chess, where basically everyone was going, no, there will never be a time when where a chess robot is going to be like Kasparov or anybody like that. And the chess grandmasters smashed it in 1996 and has just been absolutely taken as the cleaners ever since. Yes, no doubt soon when we do have the races, and it will be marathons, and then it'll be javelins, and then it'll be, I don't know, shooting. Don't bring the shooting on too fast.
I was just thinking about myself being a PropTech RoboCop there. That's obviously the original version, not the reboot. Place my knees. I'll be great when I'm around the conferences.
Maybe that picture is going to be our ident for this week. You as RoboCop. That'd be fine.
The original, not the reboot.
Okay, done. Good stuff. Just time to very quickly mention that OpenAI is building a social network. Okay,
Yes.
I think this is going to be really interesting. To this point, the likes of X and feeding XAI with up to the minute data that is unique proprietary data that nobody else has got. Meta's got loads of stuff via Facebook, via Instagram, via WhatsApp, although it says it's not training on it. I'm sure one can take that with the pinch of salt that is required. So yeah, to this point, OpenAI has just had to feed off data that's coming in from everywhere else. But now they think that with the success of their image platform and the fact that went viral on and continues to go viral every week, and we will, as we've spoken about the last couple of weeks, but actually there's an opportunity for them to build a social network that they think might take on the likes of X Twitter, X Facebook.
Yeah, it's got to have been a strategic play for some time, right? It's the accessibility of all that data. And we touched on last week, the week before, X AI now acquiring X, which is just Musk moving pieces around on the table, isn't it? But that volume of data and accessibility of data, that's really what powers it. And obviously in the day job, it's all about trying to get good access to the data because it's going to power things. It's interesting that they're going in via that pictures approach, but I think that is a good way of bringing creators together and people seeing how
Yeah.
this is what people are using, and we're getting that on social media at the moment. It's just not the one that OpenAI own, is it?
No, absolutely. So I think it's going to be, we're probably due another social media kind of platform about now. It's been a little while. So yeah, going to be really interesting to see how that lands and whether people have tried to introduce Blue Sky and Mastodon and various others. But I think this might actually have some legs. So really interesting. So just time for us to cover off our tool of the week. Now, this is a text to video platform called Kling, Kling AI. Now, it is amazing from text to video. So if you've got a video that you want created, it will create short 5 to 10 second little snippets, and you just need to type in what you want to see. And it is phenomenal in terms of what it can actually impact. There's a few others out there, aren't there, that are doing okay, but I think this one is really, really quite punchy.
No, so is this the one where they're looking very much like early Pixar shorts, straight out the box with no images, anything else, and they're getting the likes of the reflection in buildings and the shadows from the sun and very powerful creation of purely text, no image uploads.
Yeah, and I think that's the really fascinating thing about it is because these video models, they talk about, do they have a notion of a world? So have they actually created a world internally that actually then, as you say, has reflections, understands tension in rope and things like that, and the impact of different, if somebody's punching somebody, what that looks like, etc. So yeah, this is absolutely that. It seems a real step up from the likes of the VO2 is very good. VO2, VEO, that's the Google one. There's Runway, which has got its version 4 out right now, and all of them are really phenomenally good. Sora, which is the OpenAI one, it was announced back in February, only dropped in November last year, 2024, and it disappointed because everybody overtook it in February. It looked like it was going to be amazing, but then everybody overtook it. I would imagine they've been working on Sora at OpenAI in the same way as they were working on the
Yeah.
imaging stuff. So I think that pretty soon we're going to see something really phenomenal dropping from a video.
And more than likely baked into the existing models as well, or at least later versions of the existing model, so you're not having to hop between things.
I think that's right. I think GPT-5, when it comes, which I'm sure is not a million miles away, I'm sure in the next few months it's going to come together, and that will bring in all of its coding, all of the 4.0, 4.1, 4.5, 03, 04, all of these will just come together, and you won't have to try and work out which one I'm going to use. It will just be like use GPT-5, and it's got all this stuff in it. So going to be interesting to see. But yeah, for now, go have a little play with Kling and see what you can make. All right, finally this week, just want to very quickly dip into our occasional weekly update on our weird AI of the week. So this week, somebody has hacked crosswalks, so what we call road crossings, in Silicon Valley, have been hacked to play satirical messages from the likes of Elon Musk and from Mark Zuckerberg. So I think what's fascinating about this is the fact that, for me, the fact that that they're hackable. Pedestrian crossing, Pelican crossing in the UK, and actually pressing the button, all it does is beep. But apparently these ones have messages that you can plug in.
It's like the American equivalent of hacking the tube announcements. Or in Manchester, is it Liam Gallagher does the ones in Manchester? It gave me a bit of a wry smile because it reminded me of a fair few years ago now where a Fulham estate agents had their digital displays hacked, and the inappropriate material that was being displayed on those was needed the police to come out and board up the windows until the office opened again the next morning, which obviously caused us as competitors a number of smiles. And I'm sure a lot of people who were watching it had a number of smiles before it got boarded up.
Indeed, yeah. And obviously those displays are now unhackable and there's no worries. Nobody needs to be worried about any of them. But yeah, I just think it's how powerful this potential kind of interconnectivity is across all these different, and particularly perhaps government ones, as you say, TfL and Transport for London, and the ability to get into anything over the top of that. But yeah, it turns out that people in Silicon Valley are quite adept at technological engineering, and are able to do things that perhaps others can't. Yes, want to keep an eye on, but for now they've managed to turn them back in, and apparently Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg were not too happy about it. But that's not necessarily an undesirable outcome, some might say. Alrighty, that was it for this week. Thank you so much for joining us on the Property AI Report. We'll be back again next week for even more on the paired worlds of property and AI. Till then, goodbye from me and Matt. Over to you.
Goodbye from me. Have a great week, everyone.
Enjoy. Thanks again. Take care.